Are you still trying to make sense of all the losses that come with all the change and transition that we've been going through? We want to help you today with some tips and strategies. Welcome back to the Help for Leaders podcast. I'm Stacey Harris, but before we jump in, I want you to like and subscribe and hit that bell so you're notified of every episode. So today we're continuing our series on change and transition, and I've got my dear friend Carolyn Grant back with me to talk to us today about all of the transition that we're walking through. So I'd love for Carolyn to briefly kind of introduce yourself again. For those of you who haven't listened to last week's episode, tell us just a little bit about yourself, Carolyn.
Sure. Hi, Stacey. Thanks for having me. I'm a South African that lived in London for 10 years and now lives in Austin, Texas, where I've been for a decade. Married with 3 kids. That give me a lot to write and talk about as we go through the different life stages. I'm also a transition coach, and I help families move internationally or even locally, as well as one-on-one coaching to help people manage and navigate transitions.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about William Bridges' model of transition. And you and I both love his work, his book on transitions. He's got some great content on just managing this whole process. And he really goes through 3 stages that we're going to look at today and next week and the following week over the endings, the neutral zone, and new beginnings. And so today we really want to talk about that ending process and kind of the emotions that we feel in that and all of the ways we communicate in that ending zone. But before we jump in there, I'd love for you to tell us, Carolyn, a little bit about why you became a transitions coach, because I think that's really important for you as a listener to understand kind of her background, but I think it's really helpful as well.
Yeah, it's a good question because I'm actually a physical therapist by trade, but when we moved from London to Austin, I couldn't continue with my career. So the biggest change for me was that move because I arrived with a small family. It was culture shock. We had to drive on the wrong side of the road, according to me. Everything was different. And whilst I had chosen the change, I could still not make sense of what was going on internally and why I was struggling so much and finding it so hard to adapt to the change. And it was only when I read William Bridges' book that I was like, oh, now I have language. Now I have the words to explain what I'm going through. And I'm not going crazy.
Yeah.
Like there's other people feeling like this in the midst of their transitions. So that's when I thought, once I learn something, I can't help but want to share it. And like you see everything through the lens of DISC, I see everything through the lens of transition. And I couldn't help but seeing friends who were struggling with it, friends who were getting married or having babies. We forget that those are life transitions. So I just found a way. I now lead groups. I do one-on-one coaching, just helping people navigate transition.
Yeah, I love it. It's so good. I love that you were just talking about some of those life stages. I mean, it can be everything from the exciting change of getting married to a new baby. I know several families that have new babies. I'm looking forward to grandchildren, and I've realized, okay, that's, I think, me even trying to reproduce something that was before, but as I've studied this model, but yeah, empty nesters, job changes, new jobs. There's so many life transitions that we're all going through. Even in the midst of this pandemic, there's been so many things that are changing. Health, I mean, so many things. And we want to really talk about how this model applies through every single transition that you're walking through. So let's start with that ending phase. And William Bridges talks about these 7 losses. And I'd really love for you to kind of high level talk about those 7 losses and give us some hope maybe as we're walking through kind of that ending phase.
Sure. Okay, so with endings comes a letting go. There's something you've had that you need to let go of before you can move on to the neutral zone or the new beginning. And this is often where people struggle. And with the letting go and with an ending, there's loss. So I want to talk about those 7 losses, and he describes them as a loss of identity. So I mentioned my career. Arriving here, I couldn't say anymore, oh, I'm Carolyn, I'm a physical therapist. That part of my identity was gone. And the sooner I accepted that and moved on, I could look into getting a new career as a coach or whatever I chose to do. But there's a loss of identity that happens.
And I can even see where new families, you're a couple, and even though you're having this new baby, there's this loss of just the two of us.
Exactly.
I mean, everything changes. Even a single person coming out of college and going into their first career, there are these losses.
Absolutely. Of all the party time.
Exactly.
College, right?
Right. Those big breaks that you had at Christmas. I remember my first job, I thought, I don't get a month off for the holidays. I get 2 days. It was just this reality of, oh my word, there's huge transition. So
that's a good point. So there's also a loss of turf, and this can be physical, like in a move, you're losing your home that you had before, but it could also be in a job. So if you were in control of marketing and you've moved on to a different thing, you could always be looking back and going, well, who's taking care of marketing now, and who's, are they doing a good job? So I think it's that loss of an area or turf that you've been in charge of before. Then there's loss of structure. This I found a lot with the pandemic. People had plans in place. Well, I'm going to stay in this job. This is how I'm going to pay for my kids' college. This is how we are going to do these 3 vacations. And suddenly that structure that you've worked towards and planned for is gone. And that's a huge loss to try and recover and recalibrate. Loss of control. Oh. That's a big one. I think, as a mom, I'm used to having the house to myself with the kids at school, but mid-pandemic, having all 3 kids back in the house and my husband, all in a different room, trying to log in, trying to, make school happen at home, that was a loss of control. I could do nothing about it. It was a change forced upon me, and I had to adapt and get used to that loss. Loss of your future. This again, like I talked about structure, it's the life you'd planned for yourself. Like I always thought I would be owning my own PT practice and, be able to do different things that I had planned for, or live in London and, travel in Europe more. Yeah. But that's changed, and I've had to come to terms with that loss and say, it's okay. Like there are going to be other things that will make up for this planned future that I had. Loss of attachments. This came for all of us with the isolation that happened in COVID. And it's one of the biggest things, even leaving a job, like the friends you've made at work. Yeah. And if you change jobs, it's like, well, that kind of goes away. And those are huge losses because they're at an emotional and relational level.
And I've seen that a lot with students as well.
Yes.
I know my college student, of those attachments, those relationships were gone. Yeah. And, that at high school, I know your girls have all had those. We've all navigated as an adult, as a child. We've all had those attachments really changing in the last year and a half.
Yeah. And then the last one is a loss of meaning or purpose. So that's where you think, well, I always thought my life was about that. I always thought my life was about this thing. And whatever the change is, it's no longer that. And that can be, again, it's a much deeper thing. So the change is external. Remember, it's quick. It happens like that. It's like a change in the weather. But transition and dealing with that loss is a much deeper and slower process. And I liken it to changing of seasons, weather on one hand, and this is a seasonal change. It's going to take a little longer to deal with those losses.
That's a beautiful example of weather, because if you live in Texas, now you know the weather can change in a moment. Our seasons don't change as often as they do.
That's what I miss. I'm like, it's supposed to be fall, but I'm not feeling it. But
I do miss that. We lived in the Northeast for a few years, and the seasons, fall became my favorite season because we just don't have that here in Texas. So through those 7, we went through all 7, right? Yeah. All 7 losses. I mean, there's a lot of loss. And I could see me in that empty nest phase right now, kind of identifying with even the attachments. I mean, I went into Trader Joe's the other day and got sad because my daughter usually went with me. And it was just this, oh, wow, okay, Acknowledge that emotion and kind of talk about it. And
I think you've hit something. It's being aware that, oh, that's why I'm feeling sad. It helps us not just lump it together as this big, I'm sad today, but not know why. And I think once we can recognize, oh, this is a loss and it's okay that I feel sad about it. You know, the end of summer is sad for me. You know, I've had my family around, everyone's been on vacation. They go back to school and I'm like, yay, control, the house is quiet, but I've lost my attachments. I'm like, there go my people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Interesting. So many things. And I think for me, as understanding this and learning this piece of transition, is just my self-awareness is growing, that we can have different losses. I mean, empty nest. My business has changed, obviously, in the last year and a half, as many of your businesses have changed. I mean, so many things are changing. And so you can kind of compound these on top of one another. But as we acknowledge them, as we understand, oh, this is actually normal. This is a process. I may experience it a little differently than you. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic hearing someone say, oh, we're all in the same boat going through this storm. And then I saw a meme saying, oh, no. We're in the same storm, but we're in different boats.
Yeah,
and it was like this yacht. And then there's this like little dinghy over here that they were bailing water out of. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so true. We're experiencing a global change right now with the pandemic, all differently. We're all, you know, it's all different for each one of us. So understanding your losses and then being able to then go through the 4 R's, which I think is so important. So we want to just talk quickly about these 4 R's that William Bridges talks about in his transition book, which are restore, replace, redesign, or relinquish. And we really have to wrestle with, where are we? Are we trying to restore? Are we trying to go back to something that was before and, you know, restore that? Or maybe it's a job. We're trying to replace our current job with a similar job. That's the second R. You know, are we trying to redesign our lives?
That's me.
That's me too. Like, what is that going to look like moving forward? Are we just relinquishing, giving up, you know, just like letting go? Because there are certain stages of life where you do have to let go. And things, you move on. And I think just that awareness piece of, where am I going to restore? Where am I going to, you know, redesign? Where am I going to relinquish? Where am I, you know, what am I going to do? And really helping you as an individual, even thinking about your behavioral styles. How do I process information? EQ, how are my emotions coming up in all of this? Because it's a process. And if we can walk through those in a healthy way, we can absolutely get to the neutral zone, which is where we're going to go next week, and then new beginnings. So I hope you've learned something today. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for bringing us this awareness of these 7 losses, these 4 R's. You can pick up William Bridges' book on transition, get lots more information. But I'd love for you to join us next week, because we're going to talk about the neutral zone and how we all walk through that part of the change process. If you've loved this episode, I'd love for you to click here for more content and click here to subscribe.